July 27, 1943. 11:55 p.m. Hamburg. The summer air hangs thick and warm over Germany's second-largest city. In the blacked-out streets below, 2.5 million souls prepare for sleep. Some still shelter in basements from the raids 3 nights earlier. Others, exhausted by false alarms, remain in their beds. Above them, invisible in the darkness, 787 British bombers drone steadily eastward at 20,000 feet. Lancaster heavy bombers. Halifax bombers. Sterlings. Their bomb bays carry 2,326 tons of death. High explosives to shatter roofs and walls. Incendiaries to ignite the exposed timber and furnishings. In the lead aircraft, the Pathfinder crews study their H-2S radar screens. The distinctive curve of the Elbe River glows green on their displays. Hamburg spreads before them like a vast, sleeping target. At midnight precisely, the first target markers fall. Christmas tree flares. Cascading green lights that hang in the sky like a terrible aurora. The Battle of Hamburg is about to reach its apocalyptic crescendo. The road to Hamburg's destruction began long before that terrible July night. Since 1940, RAF Bomber Command had struggled to bring the war home to Nazi Germany. Early raids proved disastrously inaccurate. Bombers flying at night, navigating by dead reckoning and starlight, often missed entire cities. The Butt report of August 1941 revealed a shocking truth. Only 1 in 3 aircraft that claimed to reach their target actually dropped bombs within 5 miles of it. Arthur Harris took command of Bomber Command in February 1942 with a singular vision. Cities would burn. German morale would crack. The bomber would always get through. Harris, who history would remember as Bomber Harris, believed in the strategic bombing doctrine with religious fervor. Destroy enough German cities, kill enough German workers, and the Nazi war machine would grind to a halt. Hamburg represented the perfect target. Germany's largest port handled 40% of the nation's foreign trade. Its shipyards had built the Bismarck. The Blohm and Voss yards still produced U-boats that terrorized Allied convoys. Oil refineries processed Romanian crude. Aircraft factories assembled FW-190 fighters. Chemical plants manufactured explosives. The city's industrial workforce numbered 1.5 million. But Hamburg offered something else to RAF planners. Its medieval core, its working-class tenements, its timber-framed buildings packed tightly together, all of it would burn. The city's geography created additional vulnerability. Bordered by the Elbe River to the south and the Alster Lakes in the center, Hamburg's distinctive water features would shine clearly on the new H-2S radar sets, providing unmistakable navigation markers even through cloud cover. By spring 1943, Bomber Command had transformed into a formidable weapon. 4-engine heavy bombers, Lancasters and Halifaxes, replaced the older twin-engine aircraft. New navigation aids like G and Oboe improved accuracy. The Pathfinder Force, created in August 1942, marked targets with colored flares for the main bomber stream. Most crucially, H-2S radar, introduced in January 1943, allowed navigators to see the ground through darkness and clouds. The Americans had joined the air war over Europe, launching daylight precision raids while the RAF continued night area bombing. Together, they would mount a combined offensive designed to cripple German industry. Hamburg would be the test case. If a major German city could be destroyed through concentrated bombing, others would follow. The German defenses had evolved into a sophisticated killing machine by summer 1943. The Kammhuber Line, named after General Joseph Kammhuber, stretched from Denmark to northern France. This defensive belt divided the sky into rectangular boxes, each patrolled by a single night fighter guided by ground radar. Würzburg radar units tracked incoming bombers with deadly precision. Once a bomber stream entered a box, the night fighter received vectors from ground control until visual contact was made. Then came the attack from below, cannon fire raking the bomber's vulnerable belly. Hamburg itself bristled with defenses. 54 heavy flak batteries surrounded the city, their 88mm and 105mm guns capable of reaching 25,000 feet. Another 26 light flak batteries protected specific targets. Searchlight batteries, 150 of them, could illuminate bombers for the flak guns or blind pilots during their bombing runs. The city had constructed 137 large public air raid shelters, many of them massive concrete bunkers capable of protecting thousands. Yet Hamburg's civil defense chief, Major General Hans Kurl, knew his city remained vulnerable. The summer of 1943 had been unusually hot and dry. Water levels in the canals ran low. Many fire brigade members had been conscripted into the Wehrmacht, Those remaining were mostly elderly men, Hitler Youth boys and foreign workers. If multiple fires started simultaneously across the city, the fire services would be overwhelmed. RAF intelligence had noted these vulnerabilities. They had also developed a revolutionary countermeasure to German radar. Codenamed Window, it consisted of strips of aluminum foil cut to half the wavelength of German radar frequencies. When dropped from aircraft, these strips would create thousands of false radar returns, blinding the Würzburg sets. For over a year, Window had remained unused, as the British feared the Germans would copy the technique against British radar. But by July 1943, with invasion plans for Europe advancing, the decision was made. The Window would be used for the first time over Hamburg. The operation received its biblical code name from Air Marshal Harris himself, Gomorrah. Like the ancient city destroyed by fire and brimstone, Hamburg would burn. The plan called for sustained attacks over multiple nights, with the Americans bombing by day. No respite. No time to recover. The city would be systematically destroyed. Weather forecasters predicted ideal conditions for late July. High pressure would bring clear skies. More importantly, the heat and low humidity would make everything, wood, fabric, paper, tinder dry. Hamburg's fate was sealed not in the war rooms of London, but in the convergence of technology, strategy, and meteorology that summer of 1943. The metallic strips fell from 787 bombers like silver snow. Each strip measured 30 centimeters long, 1.5 centimeters wide. Window. Double, the Germans would later call it. As the aluminum foil dispersed in the slipstream, German radar operators watched their screens explode into chaos. Where moments before they tracked individual aircraft, now appeared thousands of targets. The precisely orchestrated Kammhuber line, the pride of German air defense, collapsed in minutes. Luftwaffe night fighter pilot Hans Messerschmitt recalled the confusion. The radar was completely useless. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack was made of needles. Ground controllers, accustomed to vectoring fighters to specific targets, could only helplessly report that the sky seemed full of aircraft everywhere and nowhere at once. The H-2S radar sets in the Pathfinder aircraft painted Hamburg in eerie detail. The Alster lakes appeared as dark voids. The Elbe's distinctive curve provided an unmistakable reference point. Industrial areas showed as bright clusters. For the first time in the war, RAF bombers could see their target clearly through darkness, creating a terrible asymmetry. The hunters could see while the defenders were blind. 19-year-old flight engineer Dennis Slack crouched in his Lancaster, watching Hamburg searchlights probe uselessly through the window cloud. Below him, 8-year-old Traude Koch huddled with her mother in a basement shelter on Hamburger Strasse. Neither knew of the other's existence, yet their fates intertwined in the machinery of total war. The bomber crews faced their own terrors. Even with Windows protection, flak still filled the sky. Messerschmitt Bf-110 night fighters still prowled, some pilots ignoring their useless radar and hunting visually by the light of burning Hamburg. The 7-hour round trip tested human endurance. The freezing temperatures at altitude, the constant drone of engines, the fear that compressed time into endless moments. In Hamburg's shelters, families confronted choices that would haunt survivors forever. Stay in the basement and risk being buried? Run to the large public shelters and risk the streets? Margaret Zettel chose to keep her 3 children in their apartment building's cellar. The big shelters were so far away, she would later testify. I thought we would be safe enough. She would be the only one of her family to survive. Arthur Harris studied the reconnaissance photographs from the July 24th raid with satisfaction. Large areas of Hamburg showed damage, but the city still functioned. Tonight would be different. He had authorized maximum bomb loads, including a higher ratio of incendiaries. Create enough fires, overwhelm the defenses and let physics do the rest. In Hamburg, Gauleiter Karl Kaufmann faced an impossible situation. The first raid had killed 1,500 people and destroyed 15,000 homes. Fire services were already stretched beyond capacity. He could have ordered total evacuation, but that would admit defeat, show weakness. The Nazi ideology demanded resilience. Kaufmann chose to project confidence. Hamburg would endure. Churchill, informed of the ongoing operation, saw it as necessary arithmetic. Every destroyed German city meant fewer weapons produced, fewer soldiers supplied, a shorter war. The moral questions would be for historians. For now, Hamburg's destruction served the greater good of ending Nazi tyranny. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland received frantic reports from Hamburg's defense sector. Radar stations reported equipment malfunctions. Fighter pilots radioed confusion and frustration. The carefully constructed defense system, 2 years in the making, had failed catastrophically. Galland immediately recognized the implications. If the British could blind German radar at will, every city in the Reich lay exposed. Colonel Hermann, commanding Hamburg's flak defenses, ordered his batteries to switch to barrage fire. Without radar prediction, the guns would simply fill predetermined boxes of sky with steel. It was wasteful, inaccurate, but what else could they do? The gunners fired blindly into the darkness, their muzzle flashes creating a false dawn over Hamburg. The Nazi propaganda machine, which had assured Germans of their invincibility, suddenly faced explaining the inexplicable. How could hundreds of enemy bombers penetrate the Reich's defenses? Joseph Goebbels would later write in his diary that Hamburg marked a turning point in German morale, the moment when ordinary Germans began to doubt victory was possible. Midnight. July 27, 1943. The first Pathfinder mosquitoes swept over Hamburg at 400 miles per hour, too fast for flak to track effectively. Their target indicators fell in perfect cascade, red markers for the aiming point, green backers up to reinforce them. The markers concentrated on the working-class districts of Hammerbrook, Ham and Borgfeld, densely populated areas where narrow streets and timber buildings promised maximum destruction. Group Captain John Searby, master bomber for the raid, circled above the target at 20,000 feet, coordinating the attack by radio. His calm voice guided the incoming stream: bomb the red markers. Ignore the greens to the north, those are decoys. Main force bomb the reds. The first wave struck at 0:03. 191 Lancasters released their loads in 10 minutes. The standard pattern: a 4,000-pound cookie blast bomb to blow off roofs and shatter windows, followed by dozens of 30-pound incendiaries to ignite the exposed interiors. The bombs fell with mathematical precision, each aircraft maintaining height and speed to avoid collisions in the darkness. Edith Wolff watched from her apartment window as the first explosions flowered across Hammerbrook. It was like watching fireworks, but fireworks that killed. She grabbed her 2 daughters and ran for the basement as the thunderclap of high explosives rolled across the city. In the cellar, 40 neighbors pressed together in darkness, listening to the world end above them. The second wave arrived at 0:25. Another 170 aircraft. Fresh crews with full bomb loads. They aimed for the fires already burning, concentrating destruction, building heat. The individual fires began to merge. The temperature at ground level exceeded 600 degrees Celsius. The superheated air rose violently, creating its own weather system. By 0:45, Hamburg's fire chief, Hans Brunswig, recognized the catastrophe unfolding. His fire engines couldn't approach the burning districts. The heat melted tires, the smoke choked engines. Water mains shattered by high explosives left hydrants useless. He ordered his men to fall back, to create fire breaks where possible, to save what could be saved. But the fire had already escaped human control. The third wave struck at 1 o'clock. 200 more bombers, their crews noting an unusual phenomenon. The smoke from Hamburg rose to their altitude, 4 miles high. Some pilots reported severe turbulence from the thermals. Others described a vision of hell itself, a solid carpet of fire covering square miles of city. At 1:20, physics took command. The thousands of individual fires merged into a single conflagration covering 8 square miles. The rising superheated air created a vacuum at ground level. Cool air rushed in from all sides to fill the void, accelerating as it moved. The inflowing air fed more oxygen to the flames, which grew hotter, rose faster, and sucked harder. A feedback loop of destruction. A firestorm. Winds at ground level reached 150 miles per hour. Trees 3 feet thick were uprooted and thrown into the flames. People in the streets were lifted off their feet and hurled into the burning buildings. The temperature in the firestorm area exceeded 800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt glass, to turn sand into crude glass, to cremate human bodies in seconds. In the shelter beneath Karnenstrasse 13, the walls began to glow cherry red. The concrete conducted heat from the inferno above. Families faced an impossible choice: stay and roast or flee into the firestorm. Most chose to run. They emerged into a world beyond comprehension. The air itself seemed to burn. Hurricane-force winds filled with sparks and burning debris. The asphalt streets had melted into bubbling tar that trapped those who tried to cross. Traute Koch's mother made the decision that saved her daughter's life. Instead of running toward the large public shelter as others did, she wrapped Traute in wet blankets and crawled with her into a water-filled bomb crater. They spent 6 hours neck-deep in boiling water as Hamburg burned around them. When they finally emerged, their street had ceased to exist. Flight Lieutenant John Charter, piloting a Lancaster in the final wave, would never forget what he saw. It was like looking into a volcano. The whole city seemed to be boiling. The smoke rose so high we could smell it in the aircraft. Burning wood, burning rubber, burning flesh. The last bombers turned for home at 1:55. Behind them, Hamburg had become a single pillar of fire and smoke visible from 200 miles away. The medieval city that had survived since Charlemagne's time vanished in less than 2 hours. In its place, a firestorm that would burn for 3 more days, consuming everything combustible within its reach, creating its own tornadoes of fire that wandered through the ruins like living things. Dawn on July 28 revealed a city transformed into a moonscape. Where Hammerbrook once stood, only chimney stacks remained, rising from ash fields like cemetery markers. The firestorm had consumed 16,000 multi-story apartment buildings. It had turned air raid shelters into ovens, suffocating or roasting alive everyone within. Bodies were found that had shrunk to 3 feet in length, mummified by the intense heat. Others had simply vanished, reduced to ash shadows on shelter walls. The counting of the dead began immediately and would never truly end. Official German records listed 37,000 killed in the firestorm night alone. Later estimates would rise to 42,000. Another 37,000 suffered injuries. But numbers couldn't capture the horror. Entire families had vanished without trace. The Meyer family, parents and 6 children, left only a melted door key to mark their existence. Some bodies were so carbonized that they crumbled to powder when touched. Hans Brunswick's fire services found scenes beyond imagination. In one shelter, 280 people had died sitting upright, killed instantly when the oxygen was sucked from the room. In another, bodies had melted into a layer of fat and flesh 3 inches deep on the floor. The city's water reserves, already low from the drought, had boiled away. Canals ran dry. The harbor itself seemed to burn as oil from destroyed storage tanks spread across the water. 1 million people fled Hamburg in the following days. They walked, crawled, or were carried away from the skeleton of their city. Trains departing Hamburg carried refugees in cattle cars, on coal wagons clinging to the roofs. They brought stories that the Nazi propaganda machine couldn't suppress, stories of a city deleted from existence, of winds that threw people like leaves, of families separated in the darkness never to reunite. The psychological damage proved as lasting as the physical destruction. Survivors spoke of Firestorm syndrome, panic attacks triggered by sirens, inability to sleep indoors, compulsive checking of escape routes. Children drew pictures of people on fire, of buildings melting, of the sky raining death. The term Ostbomb, bombed out, entered German vocabulary as a state of being, not just a physical condition but an existential one. The strategic impact rippled across Nazi Germany. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, calculated that Hamburg's destruction cost Germany the equivalent of 2 months' total war production. The submarine yards at Blom and Voss wouldn't resume full production for 6 months. But the deeper damage was psychological. If Hamburg could burn, so could Berlin, Munich, every German city. Hitler, viewing aerial photographs of Hamburg, flew into one of his characteristic rages. He demanded revenge weapons, terror bombing of London, the impossible. But the Luftwaffe had already lost air superiority. German cities lay naked before Allied bombers. Goebbels noted in his diary, "Hamburg has put the fear of God in us all." The German response proved both desperate and innovative. Radar specialists worked frantically to counter window, eventually developing new systems that could filter out the false returns. Cities began massive evacuation programs, moving children and non-essential civilians to rural areas. Fire services received new equipment and training, though nothing could truly prepare them for another firestorm. Internationally, Operation Gomorrah sent shockwaves through neutral nations. Swiss newspapers published accounts from refugees. Swedish observers reported the smoke plume visible from their shores. Even Allied leaders expressed private concerns about the morality of area bombing. But the operation was deemed a success. Hamburg's example would be followed by Dresden, Pforzheim, Würzburg, cities erased in nights of fire. The RAF lost 87 aircraft during Operation Gomorrah's 10-day span, with 552 aircrew killed. By the cold arithmetic of strategic bombing, this represented an acceptable 2.8% loss rate. Each Lancaster cost £45,000 to build. Each trained crew represented thousands of hours of training. But balanced against Hamburg's devastation, Bomber Command considered it a bargain. American psychiatrists studying the survivors noted a phenomenon they called psychological destruction of the German will to resist. The Nazi regime's promise of protecting its citizens had failed catastrophically. The social contract between state and citizen, already strained by years of war, began to fracture. Hamburg marked the beginning of the end, not through military defeat but through the systematic destruction of urban Germany. Hamburg still bears the scars. Walking through the rebuilt Hammerbrook district today, observant visitors notice the trees are all the same age, planted after 1943 because nothing survived the firestorm. Memorial plaques mark where shelters became tombs. In St. Nikolai Church, left ruined as a memorial, the melted bells still hang in the tower, frozen in their final moment. Operation Gomorrah stands as history's first true firestorm, a word that didn't exist before July 27, 1943. It proved that aerial bombing could delete cities from existence, that technology had given humanity the power to create hell on earth. The moral questions it raised, the deliberate targeting of civilians, the use of terror as a strategy, continue to haunt military ethics. Yet Hamburg also revealed human resilience. The city rebuilt. Survivors who lost everything somehow found the strength to continue. Children who drew pictures of burning people grew up to become teachers, doctors, and architects who rebuilt what war had destroyed. The firestorm that was meant to break German morale instead became part of German memory, a reminder of war's true cost. In the archives of the Imperial War Museum rests the logbook of Flight Lieutenant Charter, who flew over Hamburg that night. His final entry for July 27, 1943, consists of just 4 words: Hamburg. My God. Hamburg. Perhaps no other words could capture the moment when humanity discovered it could burn entire cities from existence, when strategy and technology combined to create an apocalypse, when 42,000 lives ended in a single night of fire. The bombers that burned Hamburg flew from grass airfields in Lincolnshire and Yorkshire. Their crews were ordinary young men, bank clerks, farmers, students, transformed by war into instruments of destruction. They returned to find breakfast waiting as if they hadn't just deleted a city. This too is part of the horror, how ordinary the extraordinary became, how routine the apocalyptic grew. Hamburg reminds us that in war there are no winners, only different degrees of loss.